Okay, so we're going to talk about something. Okay, that's something that has to do with criminal defense. But this is a right. This is a constitutional right that I want to bring up. And we're going to talk about our voting rights. Now, I know that elections are coming up, and some people say that they do, and some people say that they don't want to vote. And voting is very, very important. It's very important for all of us, and it's very important for all of us to exercise our rights to vote. Now, I want to thank everybody for tuning in, but I do want to key into a specific population. You know, our right to vote as an African American or a Black person has not been in place for very long. You know, we back in the it was the 15th Amendment that gave us our right to vote as Black people, as African Americans. The 15th Amendment to the United States Constitution specifically states, the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. So if we got our right to vote with the 15th Amendment, that was so very, very long ago, and it was definitely necessary for us to have our right to vote, then why in the world did we need why did we need President Johnson to sign the Voting Rights Act back in 1965? Well, there were several reasons why we had to have that Voting Rights Act signed. The Voting Rights Act basically made it so that in 1965, we all know that there was a lot of Jim Crow that was going on. There were a lot of bad practices, racial discrimination. It was bad. Our ancestors, our people, after we were freed from slavery, and we just got through celebrating Juneteenth, freedom that we had. But after our people were freed, we still didn't have the rights that we were guaranteed by the United States Constitution. Our people were bit, lynched, hung, raped, hurt. Some of them still haven't even been found today. Also, that we could exercise this right to vote. So in 1965, President Johnson, after it was a lot, it took a lot of hard work. It took a lot of negotiation. It took a lot of compromise, but it got done. So what did the Voting Rights Act do? It basically prohibits racial discrimination. It breaks down the racial barriers at the state and local levels that were in place to prohibit African Americans to vote. So what were some of those barriers? Because, you know, we got our right to vote according to the 15th Amendment way back in the day. Well, that really didn't, it matters and it still matters, but it wasn't really in effect because of all these different practices that were had. When African Americans were allowed to start voting. Different rules and legislation was put in place. There was something that was called the literacy test. Well, we all know that many African Americans, after being freed from slavery, were illiterate. Some ancestors could read and write and understand, but many couldn't. So when they got to the poll to go and vote, to exercise their constitutional right to vote, there was that barrier that came up. Oh, you need to take this test. You need to take this test to see whether or not you're qualified or you're eligible to vote. Another practice that was discriminatory was a poll tax. People used to get taxed in order to go vote. So you had a poll tax that was in place for people to go vote. That was knocked down with the Voting Rights Act of 1965. There was also an application. Now, we don't have many paper applications in 2018. A lot of stuff is on, you can do a lot on our smartphones or on our tablets or on our computers. But back then, there were paper applications. Hey, I can still remember filling out paper applications not so very long ago when I needed to get a job. But if the application was filled out incorrectly, you were automatically disqualified from voting. And applications, it actually brings up a point that I see quite often as a criminal defense attorney. Many times I have clients fill out an application for services. And this was more prevalent when I was with the public defender's office. Clients, potential clients, indigent individuals had to fill out an application for public defender services, and the application would be filled out incorrectly, misspelled words, numbers incorrect, social security number unknown, the name of the street that a person lives on spelled incorrectly, city spelled wrong, county unknown. So just think about the fact that how far we've come, being 2018, 2017, 16, 15, 14. If we go back, we can see how far we've come from the 1800s and from 1965. But when they were telling us we could not vote because we improperly filled out an application, just think of all the individuals who were sitting in jail. If they improperly filled out this application, they would be sitting there without legal services. Just think about that. Think about that parallel. How important is an education? How important is an education? It's very important. Another way that we were not allowed to vote are these racial disparity tactics were used. They would require our ancestors to recite the United States Constitution. Now, I've been practicing for quite a long time, and I can tell you this, I'm not going to be able to recite the entire United States Constitution. In fact, in every show, if you've noticed, we've touched on the United States Constitution because that's our base, that's our law. But every show, I'm either on my smartphone reading to you what the particular amendment says, or I have a piece of paper so that I can read to you what that amendment says. So can you really imagine how disparate that was back in the day when our people could barely read and write to be required to recite the United States Constitution in order to vote, in order to exercise their right to vote? So the 24th Amendment to the United States Constitution was passed. It was passed, let me get to that amendment. And basically what the amendment did, it knocked down, it struck down the fact that we have to pay, a toll, a poll tax. It specifically states that the right of citizens of the United States to vote in any primary or other election for president or vice president shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state by reason of failure to pay any poll tax or other tax. So we're here, and that was, let me tell you, that was revised in 1992, our poll tax. And then we have our, hold on. We have our 15th Amendment. And I'm sorry if I said back in the 1700s, I meant to say 1870, because we were freed officially in 1865. That's why we were just celebrating Juneteenth. So there's a lot of stuff going on. And we're going to get to the reason why we're talking about this voting and why it's so important. So the 24th Amendment to the United States Constitution banned the poll tax. And then in 1965, President Johnson enacted the Voting Rights Act. Now, in 1965, we had 6 Black or 6 African Americans who were in the United States House of Representatives. We didn't have any African American senators. We also, so we looked 6 years later in 1971, and there were 13 Black United States representatives, and we did have 1 African American senator. So you're probably wondering, well, Armita, why are we talking about voting rights? Why are you spending time on the voting rights? Well, in the Voting Rights Act, we have an expiration. There's an expiration date. And that first expiration date was under the Bush administration, President Bush. And in 2006, President Bush decided that he was going to renew our voting right. So basically, this means that if Congress doesn't act, if Congress doesn't move forward and say, okay, African Americans, you have the right to vote, and African Americans we have the right to vote because the 15th Amendment gives us the right to vote, but the states cannot discriminate against you for voting. If Congress doesn't move and act on that, then it expires. Luckily, President Bush back in 2006 renewed the Voting Rights Act for another 25 years. Now, it is time for us to take a quick break. Oh, I'm sorry.
I got a question. So what happens after 25 years? You got to renew it again?
Yes.
Tragic.
It is very tragic. So in 2006, President Bush renewed the Voting Rights Act, and he renewed it for another 25 years. So in 2031, so in 13 years from now, actually August of 2031, we're going to be looking at this issue with the Voting Rights Act of 1965 all over again. I think this is a good time for us to take a quick break. You are listening to Criminal Law 101 with your favorite criminal defense attorney on the air, Arimeta Dupree. We are being brought to you by KUAW, Knowledge, Understanding, and Wisdom. And we will be back in a few moments. Thank you.
We're still on Facebook Live.
Okay.
And YouTube.
And YouTube.
Technology, how our youth can get involved in technology, and just have a lot of technology information for you. So tune in every Monday, 5 p.m., BFTAA, and more show. What's going on, everybody? It's Big Juice.
And this is the girl Roxy in the building.
And it's your boy Mo Skrill.
Join us every Friday from 7 to 8 p.m. Had a beautiful week because, of course, my twins had a birthday. Happy birthday today, little baby. They was on the 14th. They twins with different days. I mean, I couldn't help it. I like they both of the brothers, so that's crazy, right?
You can catch me, your neighborhood fat boy misunderstood, and the crew. Every Saturday, baby, at 1 o'clock p.m. here on KUAW. Hey, everybody, this is Scatter. You might remember me
Right after this.
Okay.
Hey, sure, check us out. We're going to be here every day from 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock. It's old school with Scatter. Scatter's back. Check me out on the internet, KUAW.org. For all you for sale, Central Manulife people, I want you to remember that in the 60s and the 70s, we had some good music. If you want to hear some of the Temptations, some of Smokey Robinson, some of the Tim Breed, things that you don't get every day, DJ Scatter remembers. He's going to have it for you.
Welcome back to Criminal Law 101 with me, Arimeta Dupree. We are being brought to you by KUAW, Knowledge, Understanding, and Wisdom. We are sponsored by Music and More Foundation. Now, right before we took a break, we were talking about the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and how President Bush in 2006 renewed the Voting Rights Act for another 25 years. So that basically means that for the next 25 years, the states are not supposed to be discriminating with their voting practices, are attempting to limit individuals to go vote. But here we go. Of course, there was going to be some case law thrown up in this. So back in 2013, the United States Supreme Court decided in a case titled Shelby County versus Holder. Now, Shelby County is in Alabama. Holder, of course, is Eric Holder. And he was the Attorney General for the United States under the Obama administration, or one of the attorney generals under the Obama administration. So with the Voting Rights Act of 1965, in order for states to, specific states, especially the states that were known to have those discriminatory tactics with the poll tax, the literacy test, the reciting the United States Constitution, the Voting Rights Act required those states, those discriminatory states, to get permission from the federal government before they started changing their requirements for people to vote. So the United States Supreme Court in 2013 in Shelby County versus Holder made some changes to the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The changes that they made were key parts that required federal approval, key parts that would make it more difficult for individuals, African Americans, to vote. They said that basically the Supreme Court said that, well, they don't fit within a formula. There's a specific formula that was being done, that was created. And the Supreme Court said, well, it's okay for Shelby County to put restrictions on voting for individuals when they come to cast their ballot. And that's unfortunate. That's unfortunate. It's allowing other states to follow suit. We're here in Kansas City, Missouri. There's several individuals who watch across the world, who watch this broadcast across the world, and I absolutely appreciate you. But in Kansas, there was a big case against Chris Kobach regarding voting rights. Here in Missouri, we're fighting. There's new laws that require us to show driver's license when we go to the polls. This is requiring individuals who are, it's making it hard for individuals who are elderly, individuals who are poor, are indigent. You can't, in some states, they don't want for people who are not 18 to register early. Our Voting Rights Act of 1965 is slowly being chipped away. Now, how am I going to tie this in to criminal law? Because you know I'm going to do it. If you plead guilty to a felony, you can't vote while you are incarcerated. You can't vote while you are on supervision by probation or parole. That's a fact. When you stand there and you do your guilty plea, the court will explain to you some of the collateral consequences of entering into a felony guilty plea. That is a fact. However, in the state of Missouri, we are one of few states that allows an individual who is a felon, who has completed his or her term, his or her sentence, who is no longer under supervision, who has paid their debt to society. You are allowed to register, to vote, and you are allowed to vote if you're a felon, as long as you're not under supervision. There are many states that don't allow this. And this is a form of disenfranchisement, because we have a lot of people who are felons, who are good people, who are honest people, who have paid their debt to society, and their voice should be heard. So when you don't exercise your right to vote, you're allowing individuals to get into office who will make laws that will affect your rights, your child's life, your mother and father, the elderly. If you don't exercise your right to vote, you cannot complain about what's going to happen to you. We talked about 2031. Yes, that's 13 years from now. But you see that the law is the Voting Rights Act is already being chipped away. Slowly but surely. And if you do not exercise your right, if you do not become informed, don't complain. Now, if you don't exercise your right to vote, if you don't go get registered, you're basically saying that our ancestors who fought hard for us to have our right to vote way back there in the 1870s with that 15th Amendment, and our ancestors who lived through Jim Crow, who were raped, who were beat, who were killed, who were lynched, who were bit by dogs, sprayed with water hoses. You're basically saying that all of that pain that they endured was in vain. And it was not in vain. 2018 is a very important year. And what you do now, whether you're a felon, whether you're not, whether you have family, you need to get your friend, your family member, go get them registered to vote by July 11th so that they and you can exercise your right. Jackson County is changing. Missouri is changing. And I know that you see that the United States of America is trying to change back to those good old days. Those good old days before 1965. Those good old days before 1870. Those good old days when we were only considered a fraction of a human being. Let us not have our ancestors' lives and fights be in vain. I'm Arimeta Dupree. I am your favorite criminal law attorney that is on the air. And I'm looking and I'm hoping that you're excited about voting. I'm hoping that when you get out and vote in August, you make the right decision. You have some important decisions to make now. We can either go back to the good old days, or we can move forward with a new generation of leaders, a new generation of politicians, a new generation of servants. Exercise your right to vote. Have a good night. And I'm going to see you in July, the fourth Friday in July at 6 o'clock. We are being brought to you by KUAW, Knowledge, Wisdom, and Understanding. We're sponsored by Music and More Foundation. I thank you for watching and tuning in, and I'll see you in July. Thank you.
Say bye to Facebook.
Bye, Facebook.
Say bye YouTube.
Bye, YouTube.